Welcome to our program today, Building a Better Bay Area Transit System. The co-hosting organizations are Palo Alto Forward, Friends of Caltrain, and Seamless Bay Area Action Fund. My name is Gail Price. I'm board president of Palo Alto Forward. Palo Alto Forward is a nonprofit organization that works with residents and city government to make Palo Alto a more affordable, sustainable city with improved housing and transportation options for our diverse, multi-generational group of residents. Our website is paloaltoforward.com. The esteemed panelists are as follows: Assemblyman David Chiu, Ian Griffiths, Policy Director, Seamless Bay Area, Adina Levin, Advocacy Director, Seamless Bay Area and ED of Friends of Caltrain. The co-moderators and hosts are myself and Elaine Wang. I will let the panelists know when their time is up if needed. And to the audience, please hold your questions until the Q&A session following the presentation by the panelists. Please enter your questions within the chat function at your convenience. Thank you very much. So let's get started. Let's begin with Ian Griffiths.
Great, thank you. Actually, before I go through the agenda, Adina, did you want to briefly speak to some of the timely Caltrain issues going on right now and why this is a particularly timely moment to be talking about this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. As someone who worked with Elaine on some of the work that preceded the founding of Palo Alto Forward, having Caltrain be available is really an essential piece of having a place that has housing and sustainable transportation. And that you have probably been watching the very scary sounding headlines about Caltrain being financially at risk with the pandemic and some of the disputes that put at risk a ballot measure that would provide stable funding for Caltrain, providing a much more stable foundation for our housing and transportation and environmental goals. We will be getting through in this presentation the relationship between the work that Seamless Bay Area is doing and addressing fundamentally the issues that are exacerbating that crisis. Many of you know me from the role as the executive director of Friends of Caltrain, where we have been working on stable funding and successful modernization of Caltrain in the context of a seamlessly integrated public transportation network accessible to all. And it was with that accessible to all piece of the mission statement that I co-founded Seamless Bay Area with Ian and others. And we will be drawing those connections, including the relationship to the current crisis and things that you can do to help. Ian.
Great, so yeah, we'll be discussing a little bit about the Bay Area's transit challenges, not only those that existed prior to COVID, but especially how COVID-19 has exacerbated those challenges. Then we'll be hearing from Assemblymember David Chiu on the path to progress on a number of transformational reforms that could really turn a page on our transit system and help us overcome these challenges. We'll talk about what Seamless Bay Area is doing moving forward to adapt and see through this change over the next coming years. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers and close with how you can help these efforts. So many of you are familiar with Seamless. For those that are not, our mission is to transform the Bay Area's fragmented public transit into a world-class, unified, equitable, and widely used system by doing two main things. One is building a broad, diverse movement for change with grassroots, grasstops, and people across the region, making the public and riders aware of this, the importance of an integrated system, but also researching and developing the actual policy reforms that can get us there, particularly focused on governance of public transit to enable us to develop a seamlessly integrated system. We are a small nonprofit. The Seamless Bay Area Action Fund is a 501c4, our legislative advocacy arm, and then we also, Seamless Bay Area is a 501c3 nonprofit that is focused on our education and research work. We have two staff, it's Adina and myself. I am full-time for this organization, working as our policy director, and Adina splits her time between being Seamless Bay Area's advocacy director, as well as being the executive director of Friends of Caltrain. We have a board from across the Bay Area of transit professionals, many people who have worked in the transit industry and want to see it change, as well as riders and advocates who believe that a better future is possible. A growing network of volunteers, our funders, a number of foundations, but also a significant number of individuals. About a third of our funding comes from individual donors, and then a number of important allies and supporters, one of the most important of which is, of course, Assemblymember David Chiu, but a number of other locally elected officials that are supportive of these efforts, and thousands of followers that are on all social media and on our mailing list that desperately want to see these things happen. So to start us to tell the story of Seamless Bay Area up until about February, I wanted to play this video which came out on the news right before COVID-19. And we'll talk about how things have changed since that point.
Use the system. But for many potential riders, BART is just one piece of the transit equation because they have to transfer to other agencies to get to their final destination. Getting to A and B can be complex. That is often confusing and expensive. So tonight, we focus on a grassroots effort to streamline the system and force transit agencies to work together to put riders first. Griffiths is a public transit crusader. He's 36 years old and has never owned a car.
I love living in places where you can get around without a car. It is something that I wish everyone had that as an option.
Ian has worked for more than a decade as an urban planner, most recently for BART. But it's been frustrating. Only about 12% of Bay Area residents commute on public transit, and the number who ride transit at all is dropping. Bad for traffic and the environment.
If we really want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, transportation is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to be shifting more people to public transit.
Ian and a growing network of other Bay Area transit activists believe a big barrier to riding public transportation is confusion.
We are one of the most fragmented regions in the country.
The Bay Area actually has 27 transit agencies, but no requirements to make them cooperate with each other.
When you add it all together, it takes oftentimes hours to get across two parts of the region, and it takes double or triple the amount of time it would take to drive.
Each agency has its own maps and schedules and its own fare system. What happens to fares at the Millbrae Transit Center, the biggest multi-agency transfer point in the Bay Area?
You're charged an entirely different fare the moment you switch from BART to Caltrain at Millbrae, and the cost of your trip goes up by $5, $6, $7 just because you've switched systems, even if you're only going to go one station on that new system.
Those are the kind of issues that made Ian finally quit his job at BART to join other transit activists and launch a nonprofit called Seamless Bay Area.
And our goal is to create an integrated, world-class, seamless public transportation system for the whole Bay Area.
The project started with just raising awareness, like why is it that riders have to walk so far to transfer from Muni to BART at San Francisco's Civic Center station?
We should be able to walk along here and just take that stairwell down to the BART level, but because we don't have integrated fares between these two systems, you have to walk all the way out. You have to go up to the first level, walk out the Muni fare gates, and then go into the BART fare gates, pay an additional fare, and then go down 2 levels to get down to the BART level.
Next, Ian took us to the spot he calls the Bay Area's worst transit connection, the Oakland Coliseum station, where BART riders can transfer to Amtrak's Capital Corridor train that goes to Sacramento and San Jose. When you first get off BART, There's no sign telling you where to go, but down a flight of stairs near the fare gates, you might notice this little sign with an Amtrak logo to keep you moving in the right direction.
So this elevator says elevator to trains, but it's actually only to the BART trains. The one for the Capital Corridor trains is actually that elevator, which just says Coliseum Arena.
Finally, the last leg is a long, dingy ramp to get to the train.
We could get a lot more people making that connection and choosing transit, but a lot of people don't even know that they could connect between BART and Capital Corridor at Coliseum.
Now, here's the good news. Transit activists' public outreach finally seems to be hitting a nerve. San Francisco Assemblyman David Chiu just introduced a bill aimed at forcing better cooperation among Bay Area transit agencies. You can see Ian there in the background as the announcement is made. And a few days later, here's Ian with fellow activists at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, where their proposal to create a single fare system for all Bay Area agencies just won a competition for projects that could transform the future of public transportation. Now, earlier this week, Alameda County Supervisor.
So that is an overview of the story. Till February, we've been talking to people throughout this region over the past 3 years. What we hear over and over again is that our transit system is just not working for anyone very well. People say it just doesn't, it takes too long to get around, it's not reliable enough. And so often the only people using it are those who really have no other choice. And that is not what's going to help us shift more people to use transit over the long term. Of course, we pay a high price for our poorly connected and inconvenient transit system in the form of congestion. It exacerbates our housing affordability challenges. It makes it very difficult to have higher density housing near our transit stations when the transit itself is not connected or high quality, allowing people to use it for all their forms of travel, not just commute trips. It's of course our largest contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions. And it also contributes to our inequality in the Bay Area. We have to have structural changes in order to build a more effective system that brings far more people to the transit and that makes it more equitable. We need to ensure that our dozens of transit agencies work together so that it's seamless and easy to use for users, and that we spend our funding effectively. This is a map we developed, our vision of an integrated system, what we think our transit system could look like if we actually planned it as an integrated network. What that means is that vision includes a connected rapid transit network that's strategically planned at a regional level to actually work as a system, where different transit agencies, and there may continue to be many of them, but they work together to operate different parts of that integrated system. And that means that service quality, fares, schedules, and signage is all consistent, so it's seamless for the end user. And they don't see 27 different agencies, they just see one integrated system. And importantly, where buses and other transit vehicles can move quickly on all of our roads and they don't get stuck in traffic, ensuring that transit can be competitive with driving. What we need in order to achieve that, based on our research and based on our work in coalition building across over the past several years, is what we call a network manager, an entity that's accountable and responsible for the regional transportation system as a whole. And we don't currently have that in the Bay Area, which is why we have so much discordance between our many transit agencies that don't work well together. A network manager would oversee fares, service, schedules, customer experience, branding for our entire transit system. And it may coexist with other transit agencies that continue to exist. There's lots of examples of how to do this in other US cities, in other US regions, as well as we're looking at examples in Canada and in Europe of places that have effectively gone from the fragmented system that we have like right now and transitioned into a seamless network. And those are the examples that we're bringing as part of our advocacy to show that change really is possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adina to talk about what's changed since COVID-19, and then Assemblymember Chiu will hopefully speak to the legislative efforts that that we've been advancing and continue to advance.
Okay, so, and by the way, can you hear me? Am I sufficiently unmuted?
Yes. Yes.
All right, fantastic. So the problems that Ian has talked about have really been significantly exacerbated by this pandemic. The ridership declined precipitously as people have been sheltering in place and continuing to reduce their travel, even with some modest returns. Finances have been really crippled with fares all way down with the ridership, as well as the taxes that services depend on also being down. And that has led to cuts in service and broken connections. And those, if you can switch the slide, have really been significantly impacting the transit services and the people who depend the most on transit. I'll talk about Caltrain for a second, because Caltrain has been, from an agency perspective, perhaps the most vulnerable in the region, because the agency has not ever had a dedicated source of funding. So therefore, most of its funding comes from fares, resulting in the fares being high because there's no other source of funding, rendering it accessible only to, or largely to higher income people, as well as its public funding comes from 3 other public transportation agencies, each of which is facing their own financial crisis. Fortunately, there was a ballot measure that was already in the works, and a 1/8 cent sales tax that could provide stable funding for Caltrain. And to everyone's surprise, the polling that was done in mid-June, weeks 12 to 13 of shelter in place, came back very positive, with 70% of people saying that they would vote for it after some positive messaging. And yet the governance challenges that we are having with the entity that runs Caltrain being a hybrid entity that is itself unstable is leading to some risk to getting this measure on the ballot. And whether it succeeds or not, which we strongly hope that it will, the fragmentation that is showing up, even placing a challenge on stable funding for Caltrain, is one of the issues that systemically we are working in Seamless Bay Area to seek to address. If you move to the next slide. And with the pandemic, that is really impacting people who are essential workers and transit-dependent people, who are the people who have been using transit during the pandemic, low-income people, women, and people of color. We have been working as part of a regional initiative, which you'll hear about from Assemblymember Chiu in a few minutes. That is a Bay Area Transit Recovery Blue Ribbon Task Force, where we are working on encouraging and creating a vision for a transit network that will keep those connections running for the people who are using transit and need it most during the pandemic. If you advance the slide. We're also working at a regional level to ensure that there is accountability for the measures that are needed to keep transit safe. One thing that many of us who maybe have been refraining from using public transportation have been worried about is it safe? Is it possible to make this healthy going forward? And while the science is in flux and nothing is completely safe, we are getting increasing information that it is possible to keep public transportation safe. There have been no COVID clusters found in Paris and Austria and Japan. And there is a set of practices that, including universal mask wearing, that can keep public transit to be safe as people recover. And there's a set of practices that can be done that we are encouraging not only that they be done, but there be accountability in a coordinated manner at a regional level. So this crisis, just like there are many aspects in our region, though maybe not in the country as much as we would like, where we are coming together, working together, collaborating in an unprecedented manner to deal with this health challenge. And this is also opportunities for the public transportation system, which has been fragmented, to start to work together in an unprecedented manner to take on those challenges. And if you forward the slide, wanted to address one more question before we talk about how those challenges are being addressed. So people ask, well, since travel patterns are changing, are people going to come back to public transit? You know, is it worth talking about recovering public transit? Will people permanently be working from home and this will no longer be an important asset? This is from a survey that Caltrain did as the poll for its tax that shows that 70% of people who used Caltrain before the pandemic expect to ride Caltrain as much or more than before after the pandemic ends. So this absolutely continues to be essential to address our mobility and environmental goals while improving equity. And next slide. And even if the travel patterns change, which we do expect that with work from home, there may be a less peaky service, our current system does a poor job. Only 18% of all jobs are commute or work-related trips. So while our system has focused on that commute, the needs that people have to do other non-commute travel and non-peak travel have been underserved. And so this collaboration and working together as a system can help make that transit system function better for the travel patterns that people have had before the pandemic and will continue to have after the pandemic. So if you move on to the next slide, we would love to have David Chiu introduce himself and talk about what is possible to do here at a regional level and importantly at a state level to take this temporary collaboration that people are starting to do with the pandemic and turn those into permanent solutions that will deliver the integrated system that Ian talked about. Assemblymember Chiu.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining on to chat about the future of the Bay and the future of transit. Let me first start by just thanking Seamless and Ian and Adina for your advocacy and leadership. I cannot think of another recently formed nonprofit that I think has more impact on how we are going to come out of this pandemic than this one. And I should also mention, it was only a few years that Adina and Ian stumbled into my office and we had probably our first 20-minute meeting. And literally about a few minutes in, I said to them, you guys are really onto something. This was way before COVID, probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I told them, keep working on these ideas. I think there's a bill in here and I think there's a really significant Bay Area conversation that needs to happen about it. And lo and behold, we are having this pandemic, recession, all the things that we're going through right now. We are going through this conversation right now. Let me just take a moment and take a step back. So my name is David Chiu. I'm honored to represent San Francisco in the California State Assembly, but probably the best introduction I can give is similar to Ian. I have been a San Francisco and Bay Area resident for about 25 years. And for all but 4 years, I did not own a car. I got around my city and our region, mostly with Muni, BART, Caltrain, my bike, and it's been really challenging. By the way, just as a parenthetical, I should mention, I did not get a car until two things happened in my life. I was elected to represent San Francisco in the state legislature, but even when that happened, I did not get a car until my son was born, and it finally forced the question for my wife and I. And that being said, if our 27 Bay Area transit agencies were better connected and had schedules that were connected and physical connections and fares that were better integrated, my wife, who works in San Jose, would probably be able to do that commute in about 45 minutes on transit rather than the 2 hour plus it would take her either way. And thus she drives to work one way in her car by herself 3 to 4 hours a day. Similarly, if Muni was better connected to BART, was better connected to Amtrak, was better connected to the little line at the end of Amtrak in Sacramento, it would take me an hour and a half door to door to my job, but instead it takes 3 to 4 hours if I were to take disconnected transit. And as a result, what do? I drive in my car, typically without anyone in it, like most people driving in the Bay, multiplied again by hundreds of thousands of us. And this is probably why most of you are on this call. That is what we are trying to solve with the work that we are doing. So when Ian and Adina came to me and said, hey, would you consider introducing a bill, our Seamless Act, that tries to move forward these issues? I said, absolutely, no problem. Of course, none of us had any idea where this journey was going to take us. Let me just mention for a moment what our bill did when we introduced it early this year was really 3 things. What I refer to as sort of low-hanging fruit, harder conversations, and funding coordination. Low-hanging fruit. So this conversation has been around for literally decades, many, many years. Everyone in the Bay has said, wouldn't it be great if we all could coordinate better? And there have been a whole bunch of things that everyone agrees we should do, but 27 transit agencies and the MTC, which is our regional body that's supposed to be working with everyone, have never been able to figure out, for example, how to create a regional map, or how to track data of when trains and buses are on time, or how do we think about integrating fares so that rather than paying fare A plus fare B plus fare C, for one trip, which we know is a huge disincentive for particularly middle income and low income riders, how do we integrate this better so that we get more riders and do it a bit more cheaply with integration? So that's low hanging fruit. Part of this bill said, hey, all these transit agencies have said we're going to do it, but no one's done it. Let's just get it done. The second aspect of the bill dealt with the harder questions. How do we think about planning together and infrastructure investments? How do we actually get physical coordinations of the type that was just highlighted in the video that Ian started? How do we make sure that we think about what a regional transit manager is? Harder questions, and what our bill called for was essentially a task force that would meet and hammer out these issues over the course of a year to figure out. And then the third thing we were looking to do was to incent future transportation funding. And our hope was we were going to be able to go to the ballot with a major financing mechanism for all 9 counties in the Bay to support a real 21st century investment in transportation infrastructure in the way that LA and Seattle and other parts of the world have done. So this was the bill. And, you know, one thing I'll say about this bill, I've introduced now, I think about 150 bills in my 6 years in the legislature. This bill, compared to all bills, got public attention faster and more public support in the first couple of weeks of this bill than anything else we've worked on. People get it. People understand that we need to move beyond bureaucratic inertia to actually building a regional Bay Area system. And I just looked at the date, Ian and Adina. It was February 27th that we threw the first launch party to really kick off the grassroots enthusiasm for this bill. And I will say, again, I've worked on many bills that have become law and are quite popular, but that was quite a party. It was one of the last parties I attended before we went into shelter in place. And of course, none of us knew that two weeks later, we would all be doing Zoom calls. So what has happened since then? Well, obviously coronavirus, obviously recession, obviously a structural conversation on inequality has decimated our transit systems. But one of the things I will say is there is always the phoenix that can come out of the ashes. One of the things that has been a real impediment to moving forward regional integration is you have 27 agencies that have understandably been very focused on their mission and very focused on their jurisdictions to the exclusion of what's happening around them. And what has happened now that ridership has been massively cut back and funding has been cut back is everyone's trying to figure out how do we rebirth transit in all of our cities and all of our counties in a way that actually works. And because of limited resources, every transit agency is forced to cut back to the bare bones of what they can possibly do with the funding they have, and how are they going to help people get from point A to point B to point C in a way that involves cooperation. So to some degree, obviously this is the worst thing that could have happened generally in history, but it does create a real opportunity for us to revisit and figure this out. Now, I should say that the bill that we had moved in place most of the bills we had in Sacramento that were introduced this year, leadership had instructed us that unless they are 1,000% devoted to this pandemic, they're going to basically, including my bill, get stalled for next year. So like 92% of the bills in the Transportation Committee, we will be moving forward this next year. But in the meantime, what's happened is something that's actually fairly surprising, which is the regional MTC body and other stakeholders decided that rather than wait for a bill to tell everyone, let's create a task force and figure these out, let's just create a blue ribbon panel right now to figure out a couple of things. One, how do we move around with limited resources in a way that's safe? Secondly, how do we push as a region for more funding, particularly from the feds? But thirdly, how do we rebuild in a way that is integrated, that is seamless, that is using our resources efficiently and effectively and doing it in the smartest way that we can? And I'm super excited that Seamless is at the table. We have a task force that, as you can imagine, has transit operators and elected officials and business and labor representatives and others, and Seamless. And from my perspective, Seamless really was the visionary that sort of pushed this conversation along, and I'm super excited working with them. Every time I see our Seamless colleagues on the Zoom calls like we had just the other day, it is indicative of their leadership. But now I get to maybe the last 30 seconds of the plug, which is for this vision to thrive, we need an organization like Seamless that gets bigger and bigger, that involves all of you, that has resources, that is able to not just put forth really smart policy proposals, but have the grassroots support to get it done, and is working with all the officials throughout the Bay to move this forward. And that's really where you come in. And then I'll just end maybe with one, not the anecdote, but the example of Caltrain. Clearly what has happened to Caltrain is horrific. And if it were up to me, we would be figuring out how to move forward a completely clean measure that we can use to bring back that critically important transit agency. Now, that being said, in the couple of days that we've all been reading, the last few days, I have tried to reach out to both sides. And I heard the enormous grievances that were leveled at both sides. And what I kept thinking in each of the conversations was, if only we had a true regional perspective and true regional governance that allowed us to get and really lift ourselves up above the local jurisdictional conflicts that we are having, we would be in a far better place. And I say this as a former local official, as a former president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, knowing how easy it is to get into a very local point of view, but also now as a state legislator that is responsible for thinking about bigger, broader jurisdictional issues and the bigger picture. It's so important for all of us, whether you live in Berkeley or in the South Bay or in the North Bay or San Francisco, to understand that we will thrive or fall based on our work together as a region. We are not going to succeed because we decide 101 cities and 9 counties have made the right decisions within our small jurisdictional boundaries. We succeed when we figure out how to build the infrastructure that is a key. That really, for me, is why I'm so impassioned about the work of Seamless and why I'm happy to join you guys today. So there you go.
Thank you so much for your support, Assembly Member Chiu, and thanks for that overview. I'll close us out before Q&A, just present 1 or 2 more slides sharing what our plan is moving forward. And then we'll do Q&A. Here we are. The way for, when we think back to where we started, a few years ago, as we had these early conversations around our vision, we got a lot of support from a lot of elected leaders, people saying, oh, that's a great vision, but, good luck with that. If we're all the way with you, but, very skeptical that we'd be able to achieve that real change. And now when we look forward, we actually can see a realistic timeline in which we could achieve these changes. Obviously building off of AB 2057, the bill that we announced earlier this this year. That has very much influenced the current Blue Ribbon task force that's underway. That is what we wanted to achieve really with that bill, which is a forum where we can talk about governance and we can collectively develop a solution with leaders from across the region. We see that leading to legislation in 2021 and 2022 that can create those reforms and actually implement, create the network manager and the other associated governance reforms that can put us on stronger footing moving forward. And that sets us up for the last thing that we need, which is the funding. And it puts us in a much stronger position for enabling legislation for a regional ballot measure that can raise the sums of money that we need to truly transform our network. There were conversations about a regional ballot measure this year, and one of the big elephants in the room with that ballot measure was, we don't have a coordinated system. What faith does the public have that by raising a lot of money for transit, that we'll be able to spend it effectively? So this positions us much more strongly for the case that we need to make to the public to invest more in our system. We're going to be doing that by doing what we've been doing to date, which is leading with a compelling and feasible vision for change, which is based on research and real world examples of where this is already happening in other parts of the world. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are good governance practices and there are excellent examples in the United States and in other parts of the world that can show us that this is possible. And that's part of how we've been able to build the support, by showing people this is truly possible. And lastly, we have been and we will continue to be building out the grassroots and grasstops support. We published something called the Seamless Transit Principles about a year ago, 7 really basic principles that capture what our vision is for integrated transit. We've had thousands of members of the public sign on to this vision in the form of a petition. We've had 6 different public agencies that endorse this, including Alameda County, the Cities Association of Santa Clara County, the San Francisco Transportation Authority, and dozens of organizations such as Spur, Urban Habitat, Transform, Peninsula for Everyone, and others. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. I'll turn it back over to Gail to take a few questions. And then.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Elaine will be managing the questions. So Elaine, do you have some available?
I do. We've got a few questions, and for anybody who does have one, we'd like to encourage you to place them in the chat, and then we'll get to them in the order that they were received. But for Ian and Nadina, I think one of the first questions is, given the situation with Caltrain, could BART operate on or acquire the Caltrain lines? That was our first foray. Do you have any thoughts, or David?
Let me jump in on that, because in terms of looking at how effective public transportation systems are organized around the world, what we found is there is more than one way to do that. There is always an entity that does that network manager role to coordinate the fares, coordinate the schedules, to create a coordinated regional plan. But that can be done in any number of structures. So having merged agencies with that mandate, a merged regional agency that then does coordination from the rest, is one logical model. There's another logical model that's used in European metropolitan areas where we have multiple agencies that does have a coordinating entity where all of those agencies coordinate meticulously with each other. So that is one logical solution. There are others. We need to engage in a conversation about what is politically and financially feasible.
Great, thank you. Then our second question isn't specifically transit related, but I think parallels very well. There's a question about, should we do bikes better? And Randy, I think you shared a story about how you used to bike from Portola Valley to the train or the bus at El Camino. And you couldn't bring bikes aboard, and oftentimes without the car, you know, you would use the bikes. And so, is there room in this to you know, talk about bicycling as a complementary system?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having an integrated active transportation network, that actually one of our 7 seamless transit principles I can't remember, but number 5 or number 6 is seamlessly integrate our public transit system with active transportation. So in order for, transit thrives off of excellent walking and biking access and everything, these things have to work together. I think there's opportunity for greater regional resources as well as leadership in building out that network and encouraging that network. However, yeah, so absolutely, it's part of the vision. I think it's a more, bike infrastructure can be done more locally, and it is being done very effectively locally. It's probably one of the rare success stories of the Bay Area, is that local agencies have actually been building that out, but it's far more difficult to do the transit piece without the regional governance structures worked out that can run in a more regionally integrated system.
Yeah.
I'll jump in for a second on this question.
Great.
There are parts of the world that have been incredibly successful at integrating biking infrastructure with transit infrastructure in a way that gets people out of cars and helps everyone be safer and healthier all at the same time. So for folks who may have, for example, ever visited Dutch cities like Amsterdam, where you will see, with the densities of cities like Oakland, San Francisco, and Berkeley, you will literally see 30 to 50% of those residents biking on streets. In order to do it, you need to typically have protected bike lanes, bike signs. The infrastructure needs to be a little different, but you can move the same number of people for far more cheaply with obviously significant benefits for health and for the environment and congestion if you plan this in ways that get people to transit stations and have, for example, safe bike parking where people can securely lock their bikes as they then hop on a train or hop on a bus. So it's eminently doable. And it has been, as someone who also spent a lot of time on a bike and I was known in San Francisco as a biking elected, something that's been just frustrating to not have more of a conversation on. And to me, the seamless agenda is all about sort of integrating transit modes that are not single occupancy cars.
And actually that dovetails into very nicely, thank you, David, into the next question, which is especially down here because our communities are sort of designed around car culture during the 50s and 60s boom. Are there some, in addition to sort of integrating the transit agencies, are there any plans or designs on how public transit might be viable alternatives to vehicles in some of our more suburban, physical communities?
Yeah, so that question has a few different answers to this, and one of them has to do with where people live and the infill development that is happening. So in downtown Redwood City, which has undergone significant housing and office development, they did some analysis a couple of years ago, and they found that 50% of people who live in downtown Redwood City or work in downtown Redwood City don't commute by car. So this is already a transformation that they have already had, which is different from the broader Redwood City. And actually quite a lot of our population does live in the more walkable areas. This is also related to the bicycle and micromobility answer, because the safer that we make biking and walking and micromobility, the easier it is to get the mile or two to a transit spine and to areas that we might have shopping. And the third piece of my answer is that there are places around the world, including Canada, where Ian is from, where they have much higher transit ridership and much lower car use rate, even in areas that are relatively low density by virtue of having a well-integrated, effective system.
Thank you. I think we're almost coming up towards the end of time, so I'm going to ask 2 more questions. There's another, the biggest question, and there's a +1 to this, is why does it take 3 years to fix, and why is MTC unable to play the role of the network manager? Is it possible for the state to drive a stronger budget and alignment of the schedules, and maybe, let's say, use integrated ticketing and wayfinding and with mobile, in the era of mobile phones?
Yeah, this is that's a question we receive a lot of, why can't MTC just do it? And unfortunate, they do not have the mandate or the tools to be able to do it. So there's got to be, it is possible that MTC could do it with legislation that would give it different tools, given different capabilities that it currently has. And that is one possible outcome of the task force, to recommend that, you know, we don't need to change anything, we just need to give MTC some more power and then it'll all be fine. There's reason to believe that that may not be as simple of it. There may be advantages to exploring other types of organizational rearrangements, or not having that network manager be MTC, but rather be a transit operator that maybe we have like BART, or having a combination of BART and Caltrain and other large transit operators become our network manager. But the short answer is it will at a minimum require legislation, and that is something that has been confirmed, I think, across the board with through our interviews, through our talking with MTC staff, with legislative staff, and people who have been around this region who have really tried to make it work through MTC over and over and over again, and it's just not set up to do that.
I think what I would add to that is everyone recognizes we need to have someone who is, pun intended, driving this coordination, but it hasn't happened. And I am personally agnostic about whether it should be the MTC or it should be another entity, but what we need to know is someone needs to do it. And part of the purpose of introducing our seamless bill this year was to push the conversation forward, with the understanding that if the Bay Area and the 27 transit agencies and MTC doesn't figure it out, the legislature is going to have to come in and figure it out. So my hope is that Bay Area can just get its act together and just do it. But I will say there's a lot of interest if this doesn't happen within a short period of time, i.e. in the next year or two, that we're going to have a much more serious conversation about who's going to do it if it doesn't get figured out.
And there's a couple of questions in the chat, and I think I'd like to maybe just end on this one, which is just wanting to know, Seamless Bay Area, how can we help you? What are some actions that people can take to support your legislation and to support your efforts going forward?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that question, and we really do need your help. I'll go. You know, right now, we really would ask that you consider supporting Seamless Bay Area with a donation. This is core to us being able to do this work, and this is our full-time work. This is our project. We have set a goal. We hope to raise $10,000 today, and we're off to a great start because the donations that came in before the meeting, actually we're already a quarter of the way at $2,500. So please consider making this, making a donation to support this work. We can't do it without you. And more broadly, consider making seamless transit and transportation and governance reform part of your advocacy regarding and around your giving regarding climate, equity, and housing. It's really, these issues are all interconnected, and to solve the climate challenges and the equity and the housing challenges, we have to consider how transportation is an essential part of that, and a seamless transit system is core to having an effective, low carbon, and equitable transportation system. So we'd actually been welcome talking further about that if you think there's opportunities for us to be building a community that can support those linkages between transportation, climate, equity, and housing moving forward. We set up, there's a link here that you can make a donation this evening for. We've created some fun tiers that relate to the fragmentation of our region, such as, you know, $27, one for each transit agency, $151, which is actually our count of how many actual entities publicly are involved in the transportation management of our 9-county region. The $750 level, which is what it would cost to buy a monthly pass on Uni, Caltrain, AC Transit, VTA, and Samtrans, but doesn't even include BART because BART doesn't even have a monthly pass. So, which of course, no one does that. No one will buy a $750 monthly pass, but we need to have a monthly pass that can get you anywhere in the region. And it needs to be affordable. And then lastly, of course, 2057, which is referencing the bill that we worked on with Assembly Member David Chiu. So at whatever level you're able to, and we would welcome your advocacy and support in relationships you have with elected leaders and other ways that you're active in this space to really reinforce the message of the importance of seamless transit. Looks like Karen Grove has raised her hand. Do you want to?
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to out myself as someone who made a $2,057 donation. And I did that for a few reasons. One is I'm on the Housing Commission in Menlo Park, and I do recognize the connectivity and the just complete entanglement in a good and sometimes bad way of climate, housing, equity, and transportation. And I put most of my time into other things, so I put some money into the transportation part of it. And the other thing is I am a big fan of Adina, and Griffin, I'm sure or Ian, I'd be a fan of yours too. I just don't know you as well. But Adina has been a tireless advocate. I hate when people are underpaid for their work. And so I would really encourage, the question that was asked in the chat was actually, how can we help? Elaine, like most people do, added on things other than give money because that's polite. But the question was just, how can we help? And the answer is give money, because we can't expect people to do all this hard work for free. It's really expensive to live here. So let's think big and stretch. Thanks.
Thank you all. And I think a couple of folks have also, so this is great. Thank you everyone for jumping in. But I think there's also a couple of questions. That the information you presented was great. I think Jacqueline wanted the transit principles slide. So I don't know if we can maybe end on that. And if we can send this out in any way possible to share with the group, I think they would love to see it. So
we'll be sending out, we'll send out a follow-up email with, here we are, with this presentation, as well as I've just dropped the link to make a donation also in the chat, but we'll be sending that out also by email. And we've got our email addresses in there, so please follow up with us if you have any further questions. It looks like there's one other hand raised from Adrian. We have, and Adina and I certainly can stick around for a few minutes afterwards. I know some others may have to leave right at 5, but we are available till 5:15. So Adrian, did you want to?
Sure, I just wanted to give you all some support. I'm Adrian Fine, I'm the mayor in Palo Alto here. Adina and Ian, thanks for hosting this, and Assemblymember Chiu, thanks for joining and for all your support on transit and housing work at the state. Just a quick story I wanted to share, I guess. My first job out of college was at MTC, and it's a very professional, good organization doing hard work. But I remember one of the running jokes there is that doing transportation planning in the Bay Area is like, doing work in Beirut. And it was, getting at this fact that there are so many different fiefdoms and areas and interests. And I've certainly seen that in Palo Alto and working across the region. We deserve a good world-class transit system, and civilization and transportation costs money, but it's also about equity and about our environment. And that's why I support groups like Seamless. So I'd encourage you to do the same, donate to them, and write your city councils, tell them to, vote for transit and support the principles in Seamless here.
Do people have additional questions? Be sure to put them in the chat.
My apologies, I'm going to have to jet off to another, but one thing I'll just say as a last plug is among those 151 transit agencies are a lot of, I'll just put for better for worse, some of my best friends are bureaucrats. A lot of bureaucrats who are paid a lot of money to continue the status quo. And part of what Ian and Adina and all of you are doing is moving forth another vision that is obvious, that needs to happen, but but is not the status quo. And this is why you need to support. And then one other thing, and I just want to thank Adrian and others representing jurisdictions around the Bay. This is bigger than any one city or any county. And unfortunately, it's hard for local officials, not the ones on this call, but others to think above their jurisdiction because their constituents demand it. And this is one of the very few organizations that is really pushing the voice of transit riders around the Bay to unite and really rise above these local jurisdictional barriers. So again, just really appreciate what you guys are doing here. Appreciate the generosity of folks who are supporting, and look forward to seeing folks either on a train or bus sometime soon or at a transit agency meeting over Zoom.
Thanks, Assembly Member Chiu.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Yes, so for folk, we're on Zoom. We can't applaud. It's one of the drawbacks of our virtual world. Happy to take the question that somebody asked about Plan Bay Area. So for everyone who is not a planning wonk, this is our every 4 years regional transportation plan. And the question is, are seamless principles integrated into that? And the answer there is more than ever before. So in putting together this plan that guides the spending and the projects and programs that are done, there was, for the first time ever, a contest that went out to nonprofits as well as to other sources saying, what are the transformative projects you would like the region to consider for now, between now and 2050, to improve our transportation and land use? And Seamless Bay Area partnered with SPUR and put forward a transformative project for a regionally integrated fare system. And that won the grand prize as the transformative project. And what they found in analyzing that is that that would greatly increase transit ridership. It would improve equity, and it would, even over time, instead of costing money, bring in more money into the system. Another piece that is getting considered is there have been concerns that rail projects are inaccessible to low-income people. So instead of saying, well, we're not going to fund those because they're considering equity now, and in addition, they're saying not that we shouldn't fund them, but that instead we should make sure that these improvements to integration, fare and schedule into integration, and other ways of getting low-income people access should be a prerequisite to going forward with these major projects. So those are some ways that the work that we have done have influenced the planning that our region is doing from now to 2050.
And I'll just add that Plan Bay Area, there's a lot of things, while it's certainly a victory to have these concepts reflected in Plan Bay Area, which is a long-range plan, unfortunately, it's just a plan. And a plan without the entities that are able to implement it is not a very useful plan. And I think there's been a lot of the prior versions of Plan Bay Area, and are looking back, you can look back many, many years of plans that are 30 years old that did not turn into reality because we did not address the very stark reality that we need to have the appropriate governance and institutions that can deliver. And our greenhouse gas goals are a perfect example of that. We are not being effective at reducing transportation emissions, even though we've set these very ambitious goals, because we haven't reformed our transit agencies, as well as the land use side of things, to be able to really produce the housing that we need and to reinvent our transit system to be a low carbon, effective system that actually gets people to use it. Any final questions for those? People are welcome to drop off, but let's see if there's anything else here. Looks like we kind of hit on them all. So we'll let you all go to dinner then, unless there's anything else, but we really appreciate hearing from everyone today, and thank you so much, and please reach out, and we'll be following up with the slides and everything else. Oh, there is one raised hand I see. Sorry.
Just briefly, hi.
Hi.
Hello. The goal is getting people to and from work, basically.
Yeah.
I mean,
So go ahead.
in terms of that massive plan and that map, we're not, well, you may otherwise be interested in, picking up the dry cleaning, dropping kids off at school, but that's a whole other kettle of wax, right?
Actually, that is another way. Thank you for bringing that up, because that is another thing that Plan Bay Area is considering that it did not consider in any way as thoroughly as it did before, which is that only about 20% of trips are actually work commute trips, and the vast majority of trips are the trips that you mentioned in terms of going to the grocery store or the doctor's office and so on. And so in order to be able to move people effectively, equitably, and environmentally sustainably, there does need to be public transportation, including, when it runs. Right now, Caltrain has run hourly in the middle of the day on weekends, and that does not help with things that are not commute trips, as well as the bicycling and walking that people had mentioned before. So I think that is an important piece of the puzzle, to be able to make sustainable transportation work for everyone and not just the people who are working 9 to 5. Does the Blue Ribbon Group include environmentalists and housing advocates? So there are a number of groups where environmental sustainability is part of their mission, and environmentalism and environmental justice, and housing advocates also as part of the mission. Several groups that work on there as part of their mission as well. And it is important to make sure that housing and land use are considered as part of the picture. Just saying the perspective that we need to improve public transportation so that people can live over the hill in the Central Valley is, not a satisfying answer. We need to be able to accommodate more people in walkable areas in the core of the region. Ian, do you want to start with the question about motivation?
Oh, what motivates us as individuals? That's a good, I think what I'm motivated by, I think by wanting to work in this field, I think climate is a big part of my motivations, and wanting to see our public transit system as sustainable, and feeling like we're not doing it right now. We're just failing on every account, and working at a transit agency, working at BART, getting so frustrated by seeing these, blatantly obvious practices that aren't bringing more people to transit, that aren't dealing with the really important issues around how we transform our system. So motivate climate, and then enabling more livable, walkable places. I think that's always been something that's really important to me personally. And it's been so frustrating to sort of see how something that I know a lot about, transportation, to feel that I could make a difference in proposing and building the case for a new system. That motivated me to start doing this in my free time, and now in all my time.
Yeah, and for me, I'm going to start with the personal. I live near downtown Menlo Park, and I chose where to live, so I would have to spend as little time as possible driving a car and driving on the highway. I stumbled into this field. I moved to this area as someone on the founding team of a startup software company. And that was at a time when cities were starting to do climate action plans. I wanted to get involved in the community, and somebody said, "Hey, we're doing a climate action plan. Come to the basement of the library on a Saturday. And there's a spot at the transportation table. Have a seat, go there." And I started thinking at that point about why, in order to solve our climate crisis, we need to have ways of driving a lot less. why in a region that people are supposedly so smart and a region that is so wealthy is our public transportation system so dysfunctional and incapable. And that was the rabbit hole that got me into working in this area full time. And then as I started to learn more, also thinking about the way that our systems are exclusionary and segregated. So the train that I live near, why is the ridership lighter and wealthier? What systems of exclusion keep it that way? And why is our, like in the history of our area, why do we, I chose to live someplace that is, a walkable place. Why is that something that is so hard for people to do and so expensive? And why is that not available to many more people? So it's a set of intertwined things with a personal motivation. This is a good question. We are out of time. I would love to hear from everybody, which we have time to do, but may have more opportunities for conversation. It is 5:13. Is there any other final thoughts before we head on off into the evening?
As an introducer here, I would like to thank everyone for their participation. The panelists were great. The audience questions were engaging and helpful, and I look forward to having us work together ongoing and in the future.
Great. Thank you for hosting this, and yes, we'll see you all around. Hopefully doing things. Okay.
Thank you, Gail, Elaine, Sandra, and Palo Alto Forward for hosting this fantastic event. And thanks to everyone for coming.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.